The sun had just dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of burnt orange and deep purple as I stood by the kitchen window, a glass of wine in hand. The clinking of dishes behind me was the only sound breaking the evening silence, a silence that had grown heavier with each passing day in this new chapter of my life. I am Tracy, a woman who had once believed in the fairy tale of love, only to find myself divorced and starting anew. My new husband, Mark, seemed like the answer to all my prayers. He was kind, attentive, and came with the added bonus of a son, Nathan, who was just stepping into his 20s. The first few months were a blur of happiness, the kind where you pinch yourself to make sure it's real. But as the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, the house felt less like a home and more like a stage set for a drama I hadn't signed up for. Nathan, with his youthful charm and that rebellious streak, was a stark contrast to his father. He had this way of looking at you, like he could see right through to your secrets. And maybe he did. It started innocently enough. A brush of the hand here, a lingering look there. I told myself it was nothing, just the natural curiosity of youth meeting the loneliness of middle age. But curiosity, as they say, killed the cat. One evening, Mark was away on business, and Nathan and I found ourselves alone in the house. The air was thick with unspoken words, the kind that hang in the air like smoke. We were watching a movie, but I could feel his eyes on me more than on the screen. The tension was palpable, a live wire between us. I should have walked away, poured another glass of wine, and gone to bed early. But instead, I found myself drawn into the couch beside him, the space between us charged with an electric anticipation. The movie played on, but the plot was lost on me. My mind was racing, caught between the thrill of the forbidden and the weight of my vows. Nathan shifted, his arm brushing against mine, sending a shiver down my spine. "You cold?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. I shook my head, unable to trust my voice. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in, amplifying every breath, every heartbeat. We sat there, the silence now a loud, pulsating thing, until Nathan turned to face me, his eyes searching mine for something I wasn't sure I wanted to give. "Tracy, do you ever feel out of place here?" His question was unexpected, slicing through the tension with its sincerity. I swallowed hard, the wine in my glass forgotten. "Sometimes," I admitted, the word barely escaping my lips. "It's like I'm playing a part in someone else's life." He nodded, understanding flickering in his gaze. "I know what you mean. It's like we're both trying to fit into a puzzle that's not quite right." The conversation veered into safer territories, but the undercurrent of something more remained. We talked about his college plans, his dreams, and the kind of life he envisioned for himself. Each word from him seemed to draw me closer, not just physically but emotionally, into a web I knew I should resist. As the credits rolled, Nathan stood up, stretching, his shirt riding up slightly. I caught myself staring, quickly averting my eyes when he looked back at me. "I should head to bed," he said, but there was a pause, a moment where his gaze lingered, and I felt the pull, the undeniable attraction that was both exhilarating and terrifying. "Good night, Nathan," I managed, my voice steady, despite the turmoil inside. He left, and I sat there, the room now feeling too large, too empty. The wine glass was still in my hand, now warm from my grip. I took a sip, the taste bitter on my tongue, mirroring the complexity of my emotions. That night, I lay in bed, Mark's side cold and empty, and my thoughts were not of my husband, but of the young man down the hall, whose presence had begun to unsettle the very foundations of my new life. The house was quiet, but inside, a storm was brewing, one that would soon challenge everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and desire. The next morning, the sunlight felt intrusive, almost accusatory as it streamed through the curtains. I had barely slept, my mind replaying the previous night's events like a film stuck on a loop. The house was eerily quiet, Mark still away, and Nathan likely still asleep. I decided to busy myself with chores, hoping to cleanse my thoughts along with the dishes. But as I scrubbed, my mind wandered back to Nathan, to the way his eyes seemed to hold a universe of unspoken words, to the electric charge that had passed between us. When Nathan finally emerged, his hair tousled from sleep, he looked at me with a mix of curiosity and something else I couldn't quite place. "Morning," he mumbled, his voice still heavy with sleep. "Morning," I replied, my voice too cheerful, trying to mask the tension. "I made coffee." He nodded, pouring himself a cup, his movements slow and deliberate. We sat at the kitchen table, the silence between us now a tangible thing, heavy with the weight of our shared secret, even if it was just a look, a touch, a moment of understanding. "Tracy," Nathan started, his gaze fixed on his coffee, "about last night." I felt my heart skip. Was he going to address the elephant in the room? "Yes?" My voice was barely a whisper. He looked up, his eyes searching mine. I think I need to talk to someone. About my feelings, about this situation." My stomach clenched. Was he about to confess to his father? Or was he seeking advice from a friend? "Who?" I managed to ask, my voice steady, despite the storm inside. "A therapist, maybe." I'd been feeling confused. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. His confusion was a mirror to my own turmoil. "That might be good," I said, trying to sound supportive, but inside, I was a whirlwind of emotions. The day passed in a blur. Mark was due back that evening, and the anticipation of his return added another layer of tension. When he finally walked through the door, his presence was like a cold front moving in, shifting the atmosphere entirely. "Hey, honey," he greeted, kissing me on the cheek, his touch feeling like a brand against my skin. "Missed you." "I missed you too," I replied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Dinner was a strained affair. Nathan was unusually quiet, his eyes often darting between his father and me. Mark, oblivious to the undercurrents, talked about his trip, his voice filling the room with mundane details of meetings and colleagues. After dinner, Mark suggested we watch a movie together, a family night. The irony wasn't lost on me as Nathan and I exchanged a glance, a silent agreement to keep our distance. We settled into the living room, Mark in his usual spot, Nathan on the other end of the couch, and me, caught in the middle, physically and metaphorically. The movie was a thriller, ironically fitting for our current situation. Every time Mark shifted or laughed, I felt like I was on the edge of a precipice, waiting for the fall. Nathan's presence was like a magnet, pulling at me even from across the room. As the night deepened, Mark excused himself to bed, leaving Nathan and me alone once more. The air was thick again, but now it was laced with guilt and fear. "I'm going to call that therapist tomorrow," Nathan said softly, his voice breaking the silence. "I need to sort this out." I nodded, my heart heavy. "That's a good idea, Nathan. We both need clarity." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of regret and longing. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen, Tracy." "Neither did I whispered, the truth of my words echoing in the quiet room. We sat there, the distance between us now a chasm, filled with what-ifs and maybes. The house was silent, but the storm inside me raged on, the foundations of my life with Mark now visibly cracking under the weight of my own desires and the consequences they bore. Add a conclusion to the sentence, such as I struggled to come to terms with the previous night's revelations. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, my steps light, my heart heavy. Nathan had left early for his therapy session, and Mark was already at work, leaving me alone with my thoughts, which were as tangled as the ivy on the garden wall. I found myself in the study, where Mark's books lined the shelves like silent sentinels. I ran my fingers along their spines, seeking some comfort in their solidity, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying the moments with Nathan, the forbidden thrill, the guilt, the confusion. The phone rang, shattering the quiet. It was Nathan. His voice was strained, almost breathless. "Tracy, I couldn't do it. I couldn't talk to the therapist about us." My heart sank. "Why not, Nathan?" "I don't know. It felt like I was about to betray you, betray what we felt." The line was silent for a moment, the weight of his words hanging between us. "Nathan, we need to figure this out. It's not just about us." Mark. I know, he cut in, his voice sharp with frustration. I know, Tracy. But every time I try to sort it out, it just gets more complicated. I leaned against the desk, the wood cold against my back. We can't keep this up. It's tearing us apart, tearing this family apart. I'm coming home, he said abruptly. We need to talk, face to face. The call ended, and I was left with the echo of his voice, the promise of a confrontation that loomed like a storm cloud. I paced the room, my mind racing. How could I face Nathan, knowing the depth of our betrayal? How could I look Mark in the eye, knowing the secrets I harbored? When Nathan returned, his face was a mask of resolve. He closed the door behind him, the click echoing like a gavel in a courtroom. Tracy, we need to end this. Now. Before it destroys everything. I nodded, the truth of his words cutting through the fog of my emotions. I know. But how, Nathan? How do we go back to what we were? He stepped closer, his eyes intense, searching mine for something I wasn't sure I could give. We can't go back. But we can stop moving forward into this mess. The air was thick with the scent of impending rain, the atmosphere charged with the electricity of our unresolved desires. Nathan reached out, his hand hovering near mine, but he pulled back, clenching his fist in frustration. We need to tell him, Tracy. We need to tell Mark. The words hit me like a physical blow, my breath catching in my throat. Tell him? Nathan, that would destroy him, I know, he finished for me, his voice breaking. But living this lie, it's destroying us. It's not just about us anymore. It's about him, about what this family stands for. The room seemed to close in around us, the walls reflecting our guilt back at us. I could feel the weight of the secret we shared, the burden of our actions pressing down like a physical force. I can't do it, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I can't be the one to break his heart. Nathan's eyes, so much like his father's, were filled with a storm of emotions. Then let me, he said, his resolve hardening. I'll tell him. I'll take the blame. It's my fault, Tracy. I started this. No, I said sharply, stepping forward, my own resolve rising to meet his. It's not just on you. I was there, I felt it too. We both did this. The tension between us was palpable, a tangible thing that seemed to vibrate in the air. Nathan's gaze was intense, searching for any sign of weakness or retreat, but I stood firm. We need to decide together, I continued, my voice steadier now. We need to face this together. He nodded, a slow, reluctant movement. Okay. Together. The decision hung between us, heavy and final. We sat down on the couch, not touching, but the space between us was charged with the gravity of our choice. The minutes ticked by, each one stretching into eternity as we waited for Mark to come home. When the front door finally opened, the sound was like a gunshot in the silence. Mark's cheerful greeting died on his lips as he saw our faces, the atmosphere thick with foreboding. What's going on? His voice was cautious, sensing the shift in the air. Nathan stood up, his posture rigid. Dad, we need to talk. There's something you need to know. Mark looked from Nathan to me, confusion turning to concern. What is it? I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. Mark, Nathan, and we've been involved. The words fell into the room like stones into a still pond, the ripples of shock spreading across Mark's face. His eyes, usually so warm, turned cold, searching mine for any sign of a lie, but there was none to find. Involved? His voice was a whisper, barely containing the storm brewing within him. What do you mean, involved? The room felt like it was shrinking, the walls inching closer with each heavy beat of my heart. Nathan's face was pale, his eyes locked on his father, waiting for the inevitable explosion. We crossed a line, Dad, Nathan said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. It was wrong, and we're both sorry. Mark's gaze shifted to me, his eyes now a stormy sea of betrayal and confusion. Tracy, is this true? I nodded, the weight of my confession making my head feel like it was underwater. Yes, Mark. It's true. I'm so sorry. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark's face contorted with pain, his usual calm demeanor shattered. He turned away, his back to us, his shoulders rising and falling with deep, ragged breaths. How could you? His voice was low, a mix of anger and heartbreak. How could you both do this to me, to us? I stepped forward, my voice breaking. Mark, there's no excuse. It was a moment of weakness, a mistake that. A mistake? He spun around, his eyes blazing. This isn't a mistake, Tracy. This is a choice. You chose this. Nathan interjected, his voice firm. Dad, it was my fault. I started it. Tracy tried to. No, Nathan, I cut in, my resolve firming. We both made this choice. We both need to own it. Mark looked between us, his face a mask of pain. I trusted you, Tracy. I trusted you with my son, with our life together. Tears streamed down my face, the reality of our betrayal hitting me like a physical force. I know, Mark. And I betrayed that trust in the worst way possible. I can't undo what's been done, but I want to make it right, somehow. How? Mark's voice was hollow, his eyes searching mine for an answer I didn't have. How do you make this right? Nathan stepped closer to his father, his voice softening. Dad, I'm going to move out. I'll find a place, give you space. I'm going to therapy, to sort out my feelings, my actions. Mark's gaze softened slightly as he looked at his son, the pain of betrayal mixed with paternal concern. And what about you, Tracy? What are you going to do? I took a deep breath, the decision I had been wrestling with now clear. I'll move out too, Mark. You deserve peace, time to heal. I'll figure out my next steps, but I won't burden you with my presence here. The room was silent, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall, marking the passage of time in our fractured family. Mark finally spoke, his voice tired, defeated. I need time. I need to think. I can't even look at you right now. Nathan and I exchanged a look, a silent acknowledgement of the gravity of our actions. We left the room, the weight of our decisions heavy on our shoulders. In the days that followed, the house was a shell of what it once was. Mark's absence was palpable, his decision to stay at a hotel, giving us the space he needed. Nathan found an apartment near his college, a small, modest place where he could start anew. I, on the other hand, moved back into my old apartment, the one I had before Mark, before the whirlwind of emotions that led us here. The divorce was swift, the legalities a mere formality to what had already been decided in our hearts. Mark's eyes were distant during our final meeting, his words polite but devoid of warmth. I hope you find what you're looking for, Tracy, he said, his voice flat, his signature on the papers a final stroke of closure. Nathan and I met occasionally, our conversation strained, filled with apologies and promises to do better. He was focusing on his studies, his therapy helping him navigate the complex emotions of youth and guilt. I, too, sought counseling, trying to understand my own desires, my own failings. As time passed, the sharp edges of our betrayal began to dull, but the scar remained, a permanent reminder of our choices. I found solace in solitude, in the quiet reflection of my actions. I wrote letters to Mark, not to seek forgiveness, but to express my regret, my understanding of the pain I caused. One evening, as I sat by my window, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of regret and hope, I realized that while I couldn't change the past, I could shape my future. I decided to volunteer, to help others, to find meaning in acts of kindness, perhaps as a way to atone for the pain I had inflicted. The sentence is correct, but the context should match the Russian translation. In Russian, it was a narrative of human flaws, of the complexities of relationships, and the slow, painful journey towards redemption. As I closed the chapter on this part of my life, I knew that the path forward would be one of self-discovery, of learning to live with my choices, and maybe, just maybe, finding a way to forgive myself. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment if you enjoyed this story. This will help us create more engaging stories for you.